strategic coach, advisor, and we're going to talk about scaling up a company and preparing it for exit. Man, thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's we had to reschedule. Both of us have some things we've been going through, so we've been trying to get on the show. So I'm looking forward to this to talk today. Let's just jump right in. Like, how did you get into this space? What's your origin story? Kind of can tell us how you got started.
Well, it's not consecutive, that's for sure. I spent 15 years in corporate America working for a defense contractor, and I wore many hats at that company. Without that background, I probably couldn't be doing what I'm doing today. So it gave me a really big appreciation for how business is run in a very sophisticated environment. But I frankly, Ron, got choked on the politics, and I left and I went to work for a vendor of ours, and I became a sales guy. And I sold material handling equipment. I'm in Missouri, so covered half the state, and enjoyed that and did well with it. Did quite well. And then the owner of the business, third generation, approached me and asked me if I wanted to be operations manager, and I took that role, and then soon became general manager and vice president of the company. And in the process of that, I met a gentleman that was a franchisee for the Alternative Board, which is an international franchise organization for peer executive groups and executive coaching. And I was intrigued with that. And after my time with the material handling company, I started on my own. So it was 8 years with that company. And I started my own business working with privately held businesses in '04. And I've been doing that ever since. And I've seen a lot and learned a lot along the way. And after I started that business on my own, my ex-partner who ran the franchise approached me and asked if I wanted to join. I did. And long story short, I became a coach working with privately held businesses outside of the niche that I was in, which was business development, and did that for several years. And he asked if I wanted to be a succession plan. And I really love the work, and I really love working with small businesses, and I did. So we entered into a stock purchase agreement, and several years into that, actually about 8 years into that, that all concluded last year, and I bought my partner out. But I came upon the Scaling Up organization, which I was fascinated with, and I ended up joining as a strategic growth coach. So the Scaling Up organization is a coaching body worldwide. There's about 200 of us in the country or in the world. We help companies implement the Rockefeller habits. So maybe you've heard of that. It got launched in 2002 under the book Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, and that morphed into a second book, an update called Scaling Up. It's very popular, and it's turned into a whole program and a community of coaches that work with privately held businesses. So my focus now is still working with privately held businesses, but really in the spirit of helping them get to an exit point in their business. All of us will exit someday, some way. I want to make that transaction the most it can be. So that's how I got here.
So it sounds like a very logical kind of progression. You went from management to advisement to seeing a problem in succession planning, working in that realm, and then like part of truly succeeding in your business, or selling it, doing something with somebody else, is there's a big element of scaling it to where you want to be to hit your exit goals. So I see that's a very logical progression on how you fit into what you did next. I don't think, if you looked at mine, it'd look more like an ADD kid's chart of coloring or something, because I jumped around from IT to marketing of all things to real estate and then into acquisitions. So I like there's a logical and reasonable path that you made it through. Let's talk about like what kind of drew you into that, because I kind of know there's some very interesting complexities when somebody says, okay, I think it's time to do something else, or hey, I have to retire in the next few years. As you were getting into that succession plan, what led you to looking at like being a scaling up coach?
Well, I've always had high ambition about business. I'm very passionate about business. Even back in high school, the Tech school that I went to allowed a business focus. So I've always been fascinated with it. My parents opened a Radio Shack, which we turned into a business called the Stereo Place in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, a little small town. And that was a blast. I was a young man, young teenager, and that really gave me a flavor of running my own business. And so that's always been a dream of mine. So when I was able to work with small businesses, it was the next best thing, right? And so when I joined the alternative board, um, those peer groups that I run, and I've got 5 of them currently running,
Hmm.
we have about 40 different business owners, all mostly all B2B, that are in diverse industries. So I'm not industry specific, I'm industry agnostic. But I saw all these businesses struggle, and the dream of having a business and the riches that it brings and the freedom it's a myth. It exists out there, but it's very rare for that to happen. So I saw a lot of these businesses just struggle, and I wanted to help them. So the purpose of my business is really to help business owners have a better life, anything and everything that contributes to them running a better business, having the right people, doing the right things, scaling it to where it's attractive to a buyer, and even short of a sale, just having the benefit of a business that's healthy versus struggling with it was very appealing to me. And as I did that, I saw that most of these owners were struggling, and it wasn't great. They were working long hours and making sacrifices that are mostly unknown by the general public. And I was very sympathetic to that, and so I wanted to help. And so I see this diversity. I see it today, frankly. In every meeting I go to, a lot of these business owners are not they're not focused on the future. They're focused on putting out fires today, and that's a real mistake. For all the business owners listening, please consider the future because day to day will take care of itself generally, but the future is only going to happen if you make it happen.
It's interesting in the fact that if you're in the day-to-day operations and you don't take a second to step back, sometimes you just don't. Right? And I know that I've been in positions where I didn't realize that all I was doing was putting out fires. Right? It's not until you sit down and work with somebody and they're saying, hey, let's look at a strategic plan for the next 6 months to 12 months to 24, 48 months, and they start looking at that and realizing that you might have done it before, but when you get back to the office, you put out whatever fires, the biggest one in front of you in the moment. So it takes some level of dedication and determination to say, okay, I'm going to do this differently. Right.
I agree. And sometimes it's a wake up call by something that happens in their life.
Yep.
Other times it's by influence of an advisor or advisors.
Mm.
Um, the scaling up really appealed to me because that organization and the protocols tied to the scaling up performance platform just go back to fundamentals. There's nothing new in that book. It's just a great consolidation of industry best practices by the likes of Jim Collins and Patrick Lencioni and other great thought leaders that are worldwide known. And just to introduce that to these guys and get them to think about where are you going to be in 5 years from now. And generally, a business can answer that, but it takes some thinking. And if it doesn't just roll off the tongue, that tells me that they haven't done any future planning and that they are living in a short term world. And so my job really is to provoke them and bring them resources and ideas to help them understand some of the fundamentals of having a healthy business.
You and I were just briefly talking before the show, and it's like the old fable is somebody calls us and says, "Hey, I'd like to sell my business." It's like, cool, you've been prepared for the last 3 to 5 years. A lot of people don't understand that there's a process going from for most businesses. I would say probably in the high 90% of businesses out there do not run their day-to-day operations as if they're trying to sell it. And it's two different modes of operation. Your day-to-day operations, if you're just a small mom pop company, let's just say if you're doing less than $10 million in revenue, your day-to-day operations are to you know maximize the growth of the company and minimize your taxes, right? Well, that plays against you when you go put this thing on the market because every buyer like myself and all the other guys, we're looking at seller's discretionary earnings. We're looking at your profit, and if you've been tucking it away and hiding it and everything else, um, you can't just unfold it and say, "Well, ta-da, here it is,"
Right,
right?
right, right.
So, and there's a balancing act too. There's, you don't want to run it so you know push the profit so hard that you can't make it because the taxes are killing you either. So
No, I understand, but I'll share with you a saying that I picked up along the way, and I love it. I'm not the originator of it, but it's revenue is vanity,
Mm-hmm.
profit is sanity, and cash is king.
Yeah.
And I see most 95% of business owners, when you ask them how's business, they focus on the revenue side of the business and not the profit side of the business. And I've worked with several companies that at the end of the year, they look at what they made and it was nothing. They covered all the expenses, but they made nothing. And it's like, well, your business is worth nothing. And so, how those 70, 80-hour work weeks feel when you did that? So, it's a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've even seen a few where they're doing 10, 12, $13 million a year in revenue. And one in particular, the last 3 years, their best year as far as profits was 30,000
Oh,
on
my.
a $12 million earn. And like they had some legal issues and they were paying off some tax debt and some other stuff, but still, it's just there was so much not run right in that thing, so much, to the point where we're thinking, we had to actually come to the question: are the accounting people embezzling money? Right? Because there's just we couldn't figure out where it was all going. Ended up that deal did not go through for other reasons, but it's it's not uncommon for companies to like focus on revenue, and not on profit margin because they think they're gonna you know you know, first of all, they're still putting out fires, right? So they need to make that next sell so they can have the money to buy the inventory for the next, order or whatever, game that's going on inside of there. But what is the like? I know you were talking about the Rockefeller concepts and stuff like that, and the book Scale Up. Give us some of the points, like the top ones off the top of your mind. What's most important?
Well, I think the easiest place to start would be the four key pillars, if you will, of scaling up. It focuses on people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the right people in the right seat on the bus doing things right? They may be doing, well, I should have said doing the right thing. You can do the things right, but if it's not the right thing, it's not going to be productive. Um, and the question I ask for clients that I work with and prospects is, would you enthusiastically rehire all of the people that are on your team? And if the answer is no, and I usually get an emotional blank no, well, there's a problem because if you don't have the right people, you can't execute well, and that erodes the profits. The second pillar is strategy. And the intent there is, can you drive your revenue sustainably to where it's consistent and predictable, which is vital for a buyer if you get to the point of selling the business. The buyers are going to look for sustainable, predictable revenue. And if the answer is no there, then you're doing something wrong. It could be that you aren't differentiated or you're in the wrong market or you're selling too much to too many. Any number of things could occur there. The third pillar is execution, and that is, are you generating industry leading profits? And you can benchmark your business, and I advise all of my clients, go to your CPA, go to your bank, ask them for data. They have it in a variety of forms to compare you against your peers. A bank uses it so they want to understand that are your financials healthy as compared to your peers. And so that information is vital to have so you can operate. And if you're above industry average on your profits, not only are you making money and having a better time and stronger in the marketplace, but you're going to be more valuable to a buyer. And then the fourth pillar is cash. Do you have enough cash to fuel your own growth, or are you cash strapped? And obvious, many things contribute to that. So at the highest level, having the right people, having an effective strategy, being able to execute and have the discipline of that execution, and then managing cash, those are the fundamentals.
Yeah, I've seen companies where the like cash flow management could absolutely kill them. I was talking to a company that's cyclical. They have a particular part of the year that's really busy, and I asked them, do you know what a cash?" Because they didn't have very good books at all. I said, "Do you know what a cash flow analysis is?" And he says, "Well, I kind of know what it is." So I take it by that you don't have one to hand me, and he's like, "No." I said, "Is there a part of the year you have to prepare for?" And he says, "What do you mean?" I said, "It sounds like you have a part of the year they're really busy. during the slow part of the year, do you lay people off or how do you do it? Because no, I absolutely know that by September 1st, I thought the number was in the 400, 500K of cash on hand because we're going to have a slow cycle and that's what it takes to pay everybody through that cycle. Right. You know, but me as a buyer, if I didn't happen to ask that question and he doesn't have cash flow analysis, you could buy this company, think it's doing great in the spring, you know, and reinvest in growth and the capital and equipment, and then it's going to find out in the fall you can't pay everybody because that money needed to sit still because unless you're going to rehire, retrain, or do the game of scaling up, scaling down on staff, that the company needs that cash to manage the year. So what
That's
other what
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
what other areas inside of the scaling up and what are the things you see that can help a company?
Alignment, having clarity between what the leaders see and what everybody else sees. I'll share with you a really fun but effective question. Let's say you're running your business and you've got direct reports and they have direct reports. I'll ask you to write down 5 to 10 things that are keeping you up at night. And you'll write down, let's say, 7 things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go to your leadership team, your direct reports, and I'll ask them without showing them the list. Hey, Ron wrote down 7 things that's keeping them up at night. What do you think those are? And see if they can get all 7 and have them do that without collaboration. And you'll quickly find that they don't have it. They may be a smaller business where it's closer, they get a better guess at it. But the larger businesses, and I'm not talking much larger, like $10 million and up, there's a miss here. There's not alignment between what the owner or the CEO is thinking about of the company and what the leaders are doing. And therefore, the execution, they're working on things that aren't important to the owner. Although they may be important things, there's a big disconnect there. And then if you take that down one more level, there's no clarity there. So the planning is vital in that it really, there's so many companies that do strategic planning, but it's an exercise to develop a plan to put on a shelf and it gets forgotten. The scaling up methodology, and I'm not trying to promote scaling up, but it doesn't let you do that. The methodology has your team looking at stuff every week. And so that's really productive. So you don't forget about what's important. And we share all that. So the planning teams do their stuff and they share those visions, if you will, and those plans and goals with everybody in the company. It's not kept secret. And that transparency is hard for some leaders, but it's important and it's fundamental. So that alignment aspect, I think, I see all the time as misalignment.
I am actually a little shocked over the last couple of years how few companies do what I expect to see, right? Which is like things like key performance indicators, right? You've got a goal. How do you know that you're on track to hit the goal? Well, in my world, that's like key performance indicators. I want to see a dashboard that if we're supposed to hit a certain number by Q3, okay, that means by this week we should be at this number of sales. That this week we should have this much account receivables. I need to know, if you can't at a glance know whether you're on track or off track, then the small course corrections can't occur, right? You end up, you know, coming right close to it and go, God, we got to make a huge shift because we didn't do anything we planned on doing. So it's very common though that, like you said, goals are made and set on the shelf, and they're not really goals; they're hopes and wishes. I hope someday I get to do this. Um,
The hope strategy.
yeah, the hope strategy. Um, the other one that's cool is the whole like not everybody the alignment thing. I'm an honest believer in that's the number one failure of most businesses, even in most relationships in general, right? I always joke around like, what's the number one cause of divorce, right? And that's number one is marriage, right? You can't get divorced if you're not married. Number two though is failed expectations, right? The two individuals in a business or in a marriage or in any type of relationship set internal expectations of each other and failed to communicate those and work through them. Inside of a business, that's detrimental also because you know I could have a vision and have goals and have it all over the board, But if you don't know how I see us getting there, and you got your own path to get there, and the next guy comes along and he's got his own path on how he thinks to get there, and then the guys on the out on front line are creating it, and they don't know that we're all three steering three different directions to get to the same waypoint. Um, it's just it's confusing for everybody.
Well, it's unfortunate. It doesn't have to be that way. As part of my engagement, I ask my clients to do an anonymous survey
Yeah.
of all employees, every one of them, truck driver up to the CEO, and three simple questions. What do we start doing? What do we stop doing? And what do we keep doing?
Oh
And
yeah.
then I throw in the fourth, and the fourth question is there anything else you think we need to think about as a leadership team? And the input is staggering. And of all the companies scaling up worldwide, clients, communication is the number one issue in most businesses. And I see that day in, day out. And the guys that are on the front line know what's going on. And if you're not asking for their input, you're missing opportunity. They can see things that executive teams can't see. They're just not working the day to day hands on like that. They're putting out other fires. So engaging the entire staff, I think is vital, and it's eye opening. Every time I do that, um, two outcomes come from that. One is they're surprised at all the candid feedback, and they get frustrated because they've asked for that in the past, but they've not done it in an anonymous way. So they're intimidated, and then the others are thankful. They see what they the feedback, and they don't like it at all. It can be very critical. It can be brutal, frankly. Um, but they should thank them for that, right? Because if those problems aren't surfaced, they're undermining lots of things in the company, including profitability and the ability to sell.
It's funny. I started interviewing some of the, we got far enough along with the due diligence is one of these companies, and I was interviewing some of the people that work there, and they're they started interviewing back, and it was along the questions, well, how well do you manage money? And that was a weird question to ask me, and I was like, well, it's interesting. And like one of the guys come out and said it, as a company, we've made tons of money, and the owners just don't know how to manage money. They don't know how to manage cash flows. You know, uh, like it was a marketing company, and they're like, if we make it a hell of a month, and they'll go out and get new printers and color scan, higher end scanners, and like we got new gadgets and toys, but then we're trying to push for numbers next month because it's tight again, and so yeah, you'll learn a lot just by working with the employees and hey, what's going. And I do the same thing. My favorite thing is what are we doing well? What can we improve on, and what do we totally miss? Like what are we just not doing at all? We probably should take a look at. And
Same
yeah, same question, just different phrasing. And I do that almost to my smallest teams. I do that on like mastermind calls. Even like when I have mastermind, I still host some mastermind calls in different industries and stuff. And like at the end of the call, it's like, what do we do well? What could we do better? And what do we just totally forget to do all that we probably should have? And that question alone, if you just ask those of every single employee, I could get a lot of results. Um, there's a lot of stuff out there that maybe the company owners and stuff had tried 15 years ago, and they just won't try again because they've done that already. And it didn't work last time because the market wasn't ready for it, or it didn't work last time because the technology wasn't there to do it. And if they tried it again, it would be pretty easy. Right? There's a lot of that out there too.
Yeah, there is.
So, yeah. Let's talk about the kind of the like that succession planning, and you and I both know the time frame it takes to really prepare a company for a successful, profitable exit. But let's talk about what goes into some of that from a team perspective, and from your perspective as an advisor. How you walk somebody through that preparation.
Sure. Well, I distinguish succession planning from exit planning. So the leadership um, side of the business is the succession planning, and of course, exit is leaving the business. But I think the number one thing that buyers look at when they look at a business is the strength of the management team. Um, the business has to run without the founder or the CEO, day-to-day operator. If anybody is in that mode, that's that by itself. If you're running a company and you're hands-on and you don't have a lieutenant that can take the charge when you're away, that's a problem. That's the biggest detriment of selling a business, because the buyers don't want to do that. Now, in rare cases, they have a management team in place, they can absorb it, and that's all fine and good. But for the business sizes that I've worked with, which are generally under 100 million, that's not the case. And so the leader of the business has to be able to be free. Um, I'll ask, can you take off for a month and not have your cell phone and not panic? And the answer is generally no, no, and no. And that's indicative by itself. So succession planning to me is really developing your leadership team. Whether you grow the leaders internally or you acquire them, you need a strong leadership team. It's just that fundamental. So that's succession. On the general exit planning, um, it's years. That just trying to get a general manager, and I've helped several companies do that. Um, that's a very complex process and full of risk. It may not work out 3 years. In fact, I've got a client that has done this. They've gone up the hill 2 times now, and it didn't work out. So the third time, it's a female owner. She was burned. She was like, "This isn't going to work. I'm going to be stuck with this business." It's like, no, you've got the right idea and the right plan. You just didn't get the right people. So let's tighten up how we define what the right people are. And so we did that. And she's now got an operations manager that's doing quite well and soon to be a successful general manager. But that by itself, she invested in one gentleman for 3 years, and that guy really didn't work out at all, and he knew it, she knew it, and he left. That set her back 3 years, literally. I mean, just day for day. So she had to start over, and she thought it'd be a 5 year process. That was 4 years ago at this point, and now she's trying to see if it's going to take another 2 or 3 years for this new gentleman to prove himself. So it's a long time. So succession planning and handing things off and having the right metrics, the KPIs, as you say, to give the guidance in terms of what is a healthy business, what tells us we're doing well or not doing well. All that's got to be in place, and if it's not, that takes time to put in place, and that's what drives the challenge, if you will, for timing.
And it's if you're looking at the process of companies, it takes a different person to take a company from shoestring idea to that first benchmark of being profitable, all the way up to the first benchmark of um, having significant income, 7 figures.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a different person even from the 7 figure mark to go beyond that. And a lot of small business owners, just don't see that. I had a small business owner a few years ago. She came to me, and unfortunately she's passed now, but she got mad when she asked me a question and I answered it frankly. She said, where do you see this business in 5 years? I was like, exactly where it is now. So she almost like was, how dare you? I was like, you're not willing to relinquish control, get an operator in here that can operate it. And quite frankly, you're a leader. People love working here, but you're not a very good operator. On a day-to-day basis, you're letting all kinds of things drop because it's got big enough you can't do it all yourself. And she just wasn't that much of she wasn't as organized as a real operator would be. And in my world, the operators are organized to the point where other people follow their organization because they see it, get it, and like it. They build systems, processes, and when your leader is a leader, charismatic, people want to follow it, but she's just kind of all over the place. That's kind of what you attract.
Yeah.
So it takes something to say, okay, well, I've got it to where it can go now, and if I wanted to go any further, I've got to have somebody with these skill sets because that's what it takes to go further. A lot of people just try to duplicate themselves, and I think that's a big mistake. Having somebody like you come in from an outside perspective and go, your skill set is great, but what we need to take it to the next level is your skill set plus XYZ. That's a unique skill that a lot of times they need somebody from an outside perspective to even just see.
It takes a humble person to do that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
see.
Henry
I mean,
Ford model, right?
how many guys do you see out there? I mean, you just talk about an operator that failed. You know, I would almost suspect the reason it failed is she was trying to replace herself. Right? She was finding somebody that had the characteristics she had, and realistically, the company needed some of that, but potentially needed much more in different areas. And that's why it's not going to work. Is the reason you need to replace yourself is beyond the fact that you need more free time and stuff. Is the company might have also outgrown your current skills and your skill set and where you need to take it.
I agree. That's not the case in her case.
Okay.
She's pretty dialed in on where her skills are and where they are not. And she's mindful of that. And I give her a lot of credit for that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So what else is out there? I mean, number one, don't be the main operator. Like if you're really thinking about a succession or an exit, and especially in an exit, if you're the main operator, there's a lot of us that have out there on the acquisitions guys, the buyers. Our job, number one goal is my number one rule is I don't buy myself another job, right? When I'm looking at these companies, I was like, it's more of a chairman of the board type of things. I get it. I'm gonna get in and get my hands dirty for a while, but I'm looking for a very strong operator, either already in place or already have in mind before I go on day one, because I don't want to pull 80-hour weeks at your place, even if you've done it. I've actually had a couple business owners that like, hey, I'd be willing to hang on, but I just want to do it part time. It's like, okay, what's part time to you? 40 hours a week would be amazing. Like, how many hours are you working now?
Yeah.
Oh, 60 or 80.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so you just told me that your seller discretionary income, adding your salary back in. Not only did you not do that correctly, because somebody has to do that job. Secondly, now we got to add somebody else in because nobody has your love and passion for this place. So they're not going to pull 80-hour weeks like you do.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, I think you touched on something else, and that is the numbers. You've got to have, as you said earlier, a dashboard or some way of gauging where the business is and
Mm-hmm.
where, what's vital. And again, back to the alignment, it needs to be aligned to some kind of strategy of what you can do well, not just do. I've got a client right now that they're very diversified and they think it's a big strength, but in their sales side of the business, they're thin. They don't have the right resources to cover all the different segments that they're trying to cover. And so they're not effective at generating revenue to support all four divisions, frankly. And that's a real problem for them. And they think it's like, well, all of this plays with our customers at some point. And I challenge them and ask, well, are you great at all four of these? Or are you just doing them because you think it's a value? And so trying to provoke them to think about, are we focused on what we do best and what we make the most money at? There's you may have heard of the hedgehog concept by Jim Collins.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Venn diagram of three circles. One is, what are we best in the world at? And that really means that you can put a guarantee behind it. You commit things to it. You know that you're the best. And then what are we passionate about? What gives you energy? Not just things that you can do, but you got to believe in it. And then what's your economic engine? What really fuels your business? And those three question areas, if you will, or concepts, help you get a laser focus on what really drives the business. And that's another thing I don't see out there is people willing to sacrifice some aspect of their business because they're afraid they may lose revenue, but yet it's diluting them. And they don't see that because it's not visible to them. It's just not there. There's nothing that's going to stand up and say, I'm not getting enough. So the numbers really have got to be visible to the company. There's a company here in Missouri, I'm in St. Louis, called Springfield Remanufacturing Company, SRC. It's the old International Harvester engine rebuilding company. And they're famous in that they are the birthplace of open book management. And Jack Stack is the CEO of that company, and he authored the book, The Great Game of Business.
Yeah, I've read that. It's really good. Yeah.
Oh, it's a fascinating book. I'd encourage
Yeah.
everybody to get that. It's basic. A lot of people are squeamish on open book management. I get it. I respect that fully. But there needs to be some clarity around that. So when somebody at the front line is doing something, they know how it impacts the business. And I just don't see that. I've got a software company that in one of our board meetings or mastermind groups, um, the CEO said one day, he goes, I don't think my people know how things connect here at the company or how they connect to the overall system. And it's like, my God, you own that. That's a real problem. I'm grateful that you're thinking that way. What do you do about that? So you need to figure out how people can measure their own effectiveness. How do they know if they had a good day or good week or a bad week? And if there's no measure of that, you can't improve things that are broken. So I think the numbers are really fundamental, that you've got to have a good handle on numbers and not just have KPIs, because I've got companies that have KPI nausea, right? There's too many numbers and they're
Yeah,
not
you got.
actionable. They're not meaningful. They're just there because they feel the need to have them. But they take a lot of time and energy to get those numbers. And if they're not actionable, then what value is it?
A
So
lot of
I
people lose
really,
the. Yeah, a lot of people lose the insight of the first phrase, key performance indicators, right?
yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
I tell my team, if I only want to look about 8 or 10 things, right? If you're gonna put anything else on my little dashboard, the rest of it has to come off. Something has to come off, and then like they're not going to take off revenue because they're all proud of what they got for the revenue. They're not
right.
going to take off certain things because the ego won't allow them. So it makes them really very cautious about trying to add. Hey, we need to see this. Now they can track things in their own departments and stuff, but what I want to see are key things that indicate we're on track for hitting goals and when we are where we're supposed to be. And key is key. A lot of people don't, they start looking at, you know, 8 to 10, and then the next thing they know they're looking at 15 to 20, and next thing they know they got 50 data points, and it's they end up in this analysis paralysis and don't make decisions because they got all this data coming out of it, and most of it's not important.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
an interesting thing you said earlier about the employees not knowing what the business is. I've been in the other spot. I've almost lost my job in an email company because we had an interim CEO, and he had the audacity to look at me and go, "You need to explain things to where the non-tech can understand them better." And I just looked at him and said, "You're running an email company. You should probably know how email works." Right? Had no
That's
idea how the magic messages get in your box, and I was like, I just drew it all over the board so he could get it, and he's like, kind of gave me this. Well, you need to learn how to talk to non-techs, and I was like, running a multi-million-dollar email company, probably should know how email works. Where did I lose you? And he I didn't lose my job that day, but it wasn't long after that he asked me if I would be happy to leave. But anyway, I was heading back for my master's. Really, it's one of the reasons I don't make a great employee, because I'll tell you what I think of you pretty quickly. I say what's on my mind, and we move forward, or sometimes that doesn't work out very well.
I
Um,
was actually told in my corporate life,
yeah.
we pay you to get work done, not to think. And I was like, oh my God.
So yeah, let's go back to like the foundations that you're talking about inside of scaling up, and getting the company ready. We're talking about having the right, having an operator there that's going to be there when the company's gone. um, what are some of the other things you see as important? I know what's on my mind, but what are the other elements that you see that take some time to prepare, people need to start thinking about super early?
Um, well, there's a lot there I can go. I think on the people side, you really have to know what constitutes a good fit for a given role and what the outcomes are, not the duties. Uh, just recently, I was speaking with a group of owners, clients, about job descriptions and how outdated they are in today's world. And what I try to focus on is key accountabilities. What are the essential outcomes of the job that you're trying to hire this person for? And let them go manage to those outcomes. Um, One of these gentlemen was debating he knows that if you make, for example, 50 phone calls a day in the sales role, that it'll lead to so many conversions and it'll lead to so much business. Well, that may be true when you look at the math after the fact, but I can make 50 really bad phone calls, or I can make 5 really good phone calls. It's the outcome. So it's this gentleman, and he's running a very successful business. He's an engineer, so he likes that measuring activities,
Mm.
and it's just built into his DNA, so it works for him. But I asked him, so why do you want that activity? Because I know if it does this, it'll lead to this. I said, okay, why is that important? Because if that happens, it'll lead to this, and I'll get my sales numbers hit. So why don't you just give them the sales number and say, hit this? If they don't, then go ask them, what are you doing to not hit the sales number?
Yep.
So the activity, that whole
I'm a
necessity, I'll call it, of having a right definition for what's expected in each job. Every job in the company will help get the right people in the right seat doing things right. And so I think that's really fundamental. And it starts with defining the job, and then it ripples through your interviewing process, your recruiting process, onboarding process. I heard a cute thing the other day. How much ROI is there in a retirement party as compared to ROI in a new hire, welcoming new hires? And it really is an interesting concept.
Yeah. The going back to that, the concept of totally lost my thought. That's very interesting. Sorry, I had a thought, and then we talked about something for a split second there, and I totally lost where I was going there. Step back into what we were talking about earlier. You were talking about the right people and like the knowing the path. You mentioned something inside of that. It's like I'm a big believer in we set the goals, you determine the path from the management team, right? And then there's a follow up that we set the goals, you define the path, right? And I want you to document the path and show the path to everybody that's reporting to you. But because they're to follow steps, in a non-startup, right? In a startup environment where you're just trying to blaze a path and figure it out as you go, that's a
Right,
whole different set of individuals. But
right,
when you're churning out widgets and you've got a system to process, the management team, the way I like, I think that the best, and correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm learning, um, is, let's set the goals, you set the path, and then define that path to everybody that's got to, turn the widgets out. And that seems to work a lot better than, hey, because I used to be the other way around. Like here's the goal, here's the steps I want you to take it to get there, and then go tell your people. And then why am I hiring management if I'm doing that, right? I'm hiring people who are intentionally more intelligent than myself if I'm doing my job right in that realm. So let's set a goal together, and hopefully you'll elevate the goal because I'll tell you I can do X, and like why would you only do X? We could do X, Y, and Z too.
mm-hmm.
And then after that goal is completed and both parties agree upon it, the path is the second tier, not the CEO. I honestly believe that the path should be developed by the operational managers out there that you brought in to grow the company.
Well, there's a couple of tools that I have, and both of them have the same intention, and that is in a functional level and at a process level, who has single point ownership of those?
Mm-hmm.
In many companies, there's not single point. There's multiple names. So if you take a list of functions or processes, and most companies don't have their processes even defined, who owns that? Who's the champion behind that?
Yeah.
And in a smaller company, the CEOs or the founder is wearing multiple hats, and that's just the nature of the beast, and that's fine. The job there is to get them to wear less hats as they grow. But in a more developed company, that still exists. And so there's confusion on execution and who owns what. On the processes, it's cross functional. So there's multiple departments involved with any given process. And if there's not a champion for that, then everyone expects somebody else to deal with it. So from a structural foundation point of view, Brian, I think it's vital that processes have to be defined in a company. I wouldn't go so far as to say step 1, 2, 3, 4, because I think that stifles creativity. I'd rather give them guide rails and say, here's the goal and here's the parameters of which you can operate. and go figure out a best way to get there. And if you learn something and find a better way, then let's do that. I grew up in the TQM world, total quality management, and continuous improvement is in my blood. And so I think you've got to have everybody in the company constantly challenging, why are we doing that? And I think good growth and good ideas come from that. That's in the spirit of the start, stop, keep. Very few employers ask their employees their opinion. So there is lots of potential for um, building a stable company that is more valuable if you had your processes defined, if there's single point accountability at the functional and process level, and that there's some parameters of flexibility in there.
All right. So inside of that, like how do how do they actually? I mean, what's the first step for them to get that done? I mean, there's a you just unopened this huge can of we could go do, but you, you're working with businesses right now. You know the business comes in and they're thinking about like what is he going to do next, whether it's succession planning, like what happens if something happens to me, or they've already got something going on in their lives like, look, I need out in the next 2 to 3 years, I need out in the next 6 months, or whatever the process is. How do they get that rolling? How do they get the Is it just capturing what's there already and documenting it, going to the
Yeah. And in terms of the process and systems and process context,
yeah.
yeah, I think it is. I think you just go back to your team and you ask them to. You said it. Document what you're doing. Let's build the process. We don't have to create a sophisticated bureaucratic set of operating procedures, but just document the process. Create a workflow around it. So if something happened and you've got a special talent and you're only one deep, which is another big problem in that talent, if they get hit by a speeding greyhound, you have nobody to carry on. So the processes are a risk mitigator. They help protect the business, and it helps as a training platform for the person coming into the business that would be a supplement to those resources. So I think you need to just document the process. I mentioned just a few minutes ago that most companies don't even know what the processes are.
Right.
And so just start there. It's a high level. There's you could get crazy with defining the processes. Well, we flip a switch. Well, that's not a process. Your accounts receivable, your business development, your production. Those are the processes,
Yeah.
and how are they operating? And then take that down through the tiers in the company. And once you have that defined, you've got a repeatable way of running the business, and that's really fundamental. So, and it takes time to do that.
I,
Without
I, I I heard you use the word process quite a bit in there, and it takes time to do that. That's There was a leading question because I kind of knew where I was going with this.
okay,
I've actually had a couple different companies where we grew it, kind of organically, just solving problems, and then we got it fell into a groove of things were working, and it was time to make those documentation. I found that most people are almost inapt, like almost incapable of documenting how they did something, because when they sit down to do it, they start documenting how they think they should have done it or could do it or should be done, not what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. So the process that I've done with the last one is I had somebody document their step-by-step process. Then I had somebody else sit there and watch them do their process and read the steps that they said that they did while the guy actually did the process, and then highlight things that didn't make sense because he wasn't doing what was on his own sheet, right?
yeah,
And then go back and have a discussion about it, and then try it, have the new guy try it exactly how it's documented, and have the guy that that was doing it really well oversee that. And but that's just that process is both fascinating from a human psychology point of view as to why people don't just like, I did step 1, 2, 3, 4, and what do they embellish and leave things out sometimes. um it is a process. It's something that has to be gone through a couple times, and the real trick is hand that to somebody that's never done it, and say, here are the steps to do it, and watch and see if they can actually get it from one end to the other. You know, without that. Go ahead.
no, I think what you're highlighting, to me at least, is a validation
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Does the process produce the same result? It goes back to my comment: is it predictable? Is it repeatable? And so I love your idea of having somebody else take it and walk through it, and they get stuck on step 4, and out of 20, and so that's no good. Another thing I ask people to do, and I'm not a process engineer. I mean, there's experts out there that should guide these companies on this kind of stuff, but um, if I could teach you something, I probably know it pretty well, right? If I can't, I probably don't. And so I'll challenge my clients to have their employees document their process and then teach it to the rest of the team or to some other employee. And if they can do that, they've demonstrated that they have been thoughtful about it, they've gone through it, and that will reveal whether or not it's understood. Because they'll get stopped. That doesn't make sense to me, kind of thing.
I love the
So,
teaching aspect. I think you can learn a lot by teaching others.
yeah,
Um, I had a real estate investment group where we actually taught real estate investors, and after a couple of classes, you would find that we would make some of the students stand up and teach. Like when they repeated a class, like evaluating the value of a company, right, or a company, a real piece of real estate, running comps and all that. We had the students teaching it by class 2 or 3, and the
that's
reason
awesome.
is to have them get up and teach what we taught them really demonstrates the ability for them to know that they know it and the confidence that they know it.
Yeah,
Um,
very
what I was
revealing.
referring to earlier as far as systems and processes is there's just there's something to documenting what's already there, and then the validation of what you're referring to is like, does that documentation work? Can somebody else pick it up and run with it and make it work? We're getting close to the top of the hour now. I've asked a lot of questions, and I just want to make sure I've asked like what you wanted to cover. So, out of all the questions I've asked, what should I have asked? Is there something I've missed? Is there something that's really important we should talk about for the last few minutes?
That's another wide open question, Ron. What comes to my mind is back to the people side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to keep going back to that, but it's again, without people, nothing happens. I believe deeply in that a company has to have a set of core values that are real and that are alive in the organization. And I call those rules of engagement, if you will, that if you behave this way, that align our handful, 4, maybe 5 core values. Morningstar, a giant company on the West Coast, they have one core value: do what you say you're going to do, which is phenomenal. Pretty easy to measure that by. And so the core values and having a clarity about the purpose of the business, where you can get people that are excited about your business on your bus versus people that just want a job. And that distinction by itself can really make a huge impact on the business. I've got way too many clients that have people that are on their staff that they have a special skill or they've been there a long time or whatever reason, they're afraid to let them thrive elsewhere. It's really holding the company back. And they're tolerating behaviors that they normally would not tolerate. It's a hostage situation almost. So I think a company really needs to be clear about their core values and not customer facing. Those are brand values to me. But what I'm talking about are behaviors that are expected and disciplined in the company. And I don't mean that in a critical sense. I mean that they're real. If you behave this way, we're getting along. If you don't behave this way, you can't play with us. You're just
Yeah.
not going to get along, and that's so disruptive in a company. So, my when all of my clients, I start with core values as a foundation as to how are you operating, how's your execution, how's your profitability. A really good question is, are you operating without drama? And the answer to that generally most companies is, oh no, we've got drama, and that's because behaviors are not being managed properly, and it's not an easy thing to do, and it can
No.
take quite a bit of time to come up with the proper core values, and they're not just words to put on a T-shirt or a poster or website. It's anything but that. It's a real serious set of operating principles for the employees.
It's interesting is I've worked at all kinds of companies. I think the reason that the process side of it was a little easier for me, or it comes naturally, is for a while there I was a process engineer. I was a computer test engineer for Lockheed Martin, and writing procedures to test computer systems was my job,
There you go.
right? And they had to write them to where somebody else could, I had to figure out what would break them, write a procedure to show what broke them, and then hand that procedure to somebody else, and they had to be able to repeat it, right? You do step 1, 2, and 3, and the system breaks. The programmer fixes the software. You do step 1, 2, and 3. Does it still work? And these were government systems, so they had to have all that. So it was natural for me. But I've also seen, even in that company, we had one guy, you could just like somebody would say something in a meeting, and you'd see us all kind of looking for this guy because he was about to blow up, right? And he would blow up, tell everybody, you're effing idiots, and they'd stomp out of the room. Well, they never fired him because he was absolute genius in software, and he was rarely wrong. He's just managed it very, very abruptly and rudely, and it made a lot of people hard. He just didn't want to work with the guy. But that said, there are other people out there that know code as well as him that won't behave that way, and it's prevalent. It's actually very, very prevalent in the tech industry. You'll have prima donnas that are just really hard to manage, but they may be just an expert so into their field, like Oracle DBAs and stuff like that come to mind, that they're really hard to replace, and they know it, so they play this game.
Yep.
But
And that's the hostage situation. They've got you over a barrel basically, and they come in and threaten you and create drama. It's not comfortable. I call it babysitting, frankly, and all the HR issues. And I probably get into more HR discussions with my clients than any subject, period.
yeah,
Maybe that's why I'm so hyper focused on the people side of the business. But I think the core values are really fundamental for a well-oiled machine to operate and grow and play along well with each other, and frankly have fun, right?
yeah. I'm not a believer that everybody needs to get along. I don't believe that at all. I believe that even to the extent to what that guy did, I think if it was dialed down just a notch or two, was healthy to the organization. Just because sometimes if everybody's complacent and trying to get along and it's a well-oiled machine, when something is slightly off and nobody just wants to say it, they're being too nice to each other. That's not healthy either. There, I won't say the guy's name. I don't know if he's even still alive. I've been out of that industry for 20 something years, and he was older than me. But out of respect, I won't say his name. But when he said something, it was actually wrong, right? The guy was actually smart, and you maybe there's two things, right? There's the you call it there's a name for it. I'm not going to think of it for a second. But there's a name in a setting, in a psychological setting where everybody knows somebody else is going to say something, so they don't.
A
Right?
halo
Maybe
effect.
there's a halo effect. We all kind of like we're going to be the angels because we know the devil's sitting over and he's not going to let this go. But so had he not been in the room, would the problem had been addressed? Probably. But there's not. I honestly think some level of that that not I hate the word drama, but some level of drama inside of an organization is actually
I
healthy.
prefer to. I totally agree
Yeah,
with you, Ron. So maybe I mischaracterized that,
yeah,
but I think it's fundamental for a healthy debate.
yeah,
When I say get along, I mean you're treating each other with respect. The golden rule, if you will, and you're doing what's expected of you. And core values are nothing other than the most non-negotiable expectations as an employee. And there's a
right.
handful. So when I talk about that, um, I tend to be I like to scrap. So I like to get into a debate and have a robust conversation. That's just part of my makeup, and
Yeah,
I encourage that with my clients. In fact, in the planning sessions, I start off with that. It's like if you guys are going to sit here and just wait for other people to talk, we're not going to get very far with this. So
no,
you may have the best idea, and if you're intimidated or shy about bringing that up, all of us lose. So I couldn't agree more with you that some level of debate and conflict is very healthy. But at some point, there's a continuum where you reach a tipping point, it becomes personal.
right.
And that's where it gets unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had people, good friends even, they're like, we're on the phone and they're talking about how bad an employee is. And I'm like, well, why don't you just let him go? Well, he does this, this, and this, and this. Or, I've had even people go, well, he was here when I got here. I was like, yeah, but you're his boss. It doesn't matter. Like, Well, he knows everything about the system. The only one, right? They there's some fear of letting something go just because they, I don't know. I've seen people hold on to so many toxic employees. I honestly believe there's no such thing as a bad employee. Some of them would just be better employees flipping burgers for somebody, or
Yeah,
doing something other than being an employee for me.
yeah,
But
we all have our
there's
bad.
no such thing as a bad one. It's just sometimes it's bad for you in the moment.
Yeah, I have a motto: hire fast, fire fast, hire slow. Excuse me, I had
Yeah,
it back. Fire
yeah,
fast, hire slow. And
yep.
you you know the reality is, and this happens all the time in my circles.
Hmm.
The spouse's husband moves, right? Your employee's spouse moves, and they move with them, and you just
Hmm.
lost a great employee, and they were this employee that you couldn't lose
Yep.
because you were afraid of firing them. Well, they're controlling that scenario, not you. And so I encourage my clients to don't be afraid of that, because they can come in and their life could change and come in and change your life. And now you have to react to that in a panic state instead of being proactive about that and dealing with the tough issue of replacing an employee. I mean, nobody likes to do that. I'm not naive about that. But for the health of the business and every other employee, that's the responsibility of leadership. Um, I appreciate your comment about there are no bad employees. I think if you have a bad employee, there was some failure along the way of hiring or mentoring or developing that employee. It
Yep.
wasn't the employee's fault. It was you didn't hire or treat the right guy or the guy right.
Yep. Well, we're above the top of the hour. We're gonna have to call the show here. Let's make sure everybody knows how to get a hold of you, man. I have it up on the screen. Why don't you tell everybody the best way you want people to reach out to you?
Probably my email, and that is bgleason uh, at kelsey-group.com. So bgleason at kelsey-group.com.
Cool. I think I have that in the show notes. If not, I'll add it to the show notes. People will be able to reach out to you that way. And you have any big ask out there? Is there anything you'd love for, what can myself or the audience do to help you out?
Well, great question. I can't think of anything other than if you've got a burning question that you are wrestling with, um, reach out to me. Maybe I can help. And if you've got something very creative that you've heard this conversation, you've got some solutions to it that you've experienced, share it with me, and I'll share it with other business owners, and you can impact the life of others. So,
Awesome. We'll do that. I appreciate your time. Hang out for a second when the show ends, and we'll chat for a few seconds, and we'll have it done here. That's the
I had
show,
fun,
guys.
Brett. Thank you.
Thank you.